Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Ezra chapters 7 through 10 in our continuing study of the historical books. Now, chapters 1 through 6, we saw already, was the return of the Jews to the land. Not all of them returned, but some did, under Zerubbabel. He's the descendant of King Jehoiachin, this descendant of David, part of the ruling family. But he's not a king now. And they come back and they rebuild the temple. They're interrupted, and a couple of prophets get up, Haggai and Zechariah, and then they complete it. Now, as we come to chapter 7, a long time has passed, and we're looking at a second return of the Jews under Ezra, who is a priest, but also a scribe and a teacher. And he's going to come back and he's going to help fix the worship. Zerubbabel was fixing the temple. The structure had to be rebuilt. Now that they've rebuilt it, they're restoring the worship. So if we look at Ezra, Nehemiah, but I'm also putting Esther in here because they all occur around the same general time. We had starting in 538. I'd almost be tempted to back that up to 539, where Cyrus had come in and taken over as the new emperor of the brand new Persian Empire. And that was chapters 1 through 6, where he allows them to return, and they do. Now they don't get it finished. They start rebuilding the temple. It's not completed until the year 516 BC, and that's where Ezra chapter 6 ends. Then, as we turn the page, if we were going in chronological order, which we're not, we would go then to the book of Esther. That picks up again quite a few years later. 473 BC is when it would begin. Um, it actually takes place over a number of years, so it's not all that year. But we have the events of the book of Esther beginning, and then that story taking place. Then we come now to 458 BC. Again, 15 years after this, we're going to have the second return of which we're speaking under Ezra, and that will be Ezra chapters 7 through 10. And then after that, 445 to 444 BC, around that period, we're going to have the return under Nehemiah, who will rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. The walls are still in a state of disrepair up until his day. Now, some variations on a name, not on a theme, but on a name. We're reading about Ezra, and I'm going to continue to use that name. Azariah would be the way we would pronounce it in Hebrew. It just means the Lord has helped. And then if you look at the Greek version of that, it's Esdras, but it's the same name. That's just the Greek form, which you'll see both in the Septuagint, but also you're going to have in the Septuagint some other books. We'll read about first and second and third, Esdras with some names on it. The one that we're looking at here is canonical, but then there will be some later, well, let me just say, some later fun stories told about Ezra, and I do not believe they are to be taken as canonical. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily all untrue. Even a stop clock is right twice a day. But we're not going to be looking at that. I've done a class elsewhere on the books of the Apocrypha, and you're welcome to look at that and see what I've said about those books. Ezra chapter 7 and verse 1, now we pick up, and remember, 55 plus years have passed since the building of the temple. Now, after these things, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, I think this is the Artaxerxes that we know as Artaxerxes. He comes along after Xerxes. And if you don't know who Xerxes is, go back and look at some Greek history because he had some run-ins with the Greeks, or look at the book of Esther, because even though he's called by a title Ahasuerus, most scholars think that's Xerxes as well. But that's all gone now. Now we have Artaxerxes, king of Persia. There went up Ezra, son of Sariah, son of Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Shallum, son of Zadok, son of Ahitub, son of Amariah, son of Azariah, son of Meraioth, son of Zechariah, son of Uzi, son of Buki, son of Abishua, son of Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of, notice we go all the way back to Aaron, the chief priest. And you say, well, did I really need to hear that? Well, you did in the sense that Ezra is going to be able to trace his genealogy all the way back to Aaron. He's a legitimate priest. But Not everybody's able to do that anymore because records have been lost. A lot happens when you move out of an area, and they hadn't moved willingly. Remember that you'd had the Babylonian captivity. They had been forced to move. It was not a pleasant move, and so a lot of people couldn't do what Ezra could do, and that is trace his genealogy back all the way to Aaron. Well, this Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a scribe, skilled in the law of Moses, which the Lord God of Israel had given. And the king granted him all he requested because the hand of the Lord his God was upon him. So notice he's not only a priest, but he's a scribe. That means he can read and write. Not everyone could do that. That was a very specialized profession, and more specifically, a scribe skilled in the law of Moses. He was an expert in the law, in the scriptures. Some of the sons of Israel, and now notice the collection here. Some of the sons of Israel and some of the priests, the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the temple servants. These are all the people that serve in worship. They went up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. He, that is Ezra, came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. So he's with them. They're going at the same time. Verse 9, for on the first of the first month, he began to go up from Babylon, and on the first of the 5th month, he came to Jerusalem. It's going to take 5 months for this trip to take place. And they begin, they're not in a hurry. This is not a rush job. They're going to make all sorts of arrangements. They're going to make all sorts of collections of funds. They're going to do it properly and by the book. And notice he came up to Jerusalem because the good hand of his God was upon him. So we see God being given the credit and the glory for what's taking place. Verse 10, for Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to practice it. And there's nothing worse than somebody that studied the scriptures, but then they don't apply it to their lives. We need to be people that do the scriptures and not just study the scriptures. But notice not just to study it, to practice it, and to teach his statutes and ordinances in Israel. So Ezra is both a student, but also a teacher, but also a priest. Now, a priest usually goes from the people to represent the people to God. A teacher, similar to the way a prophet does, but it doesn't call Ezra a prophet. But a teacher goes from the Lord, hopefully, and from the scriptures that God has given to teach them to the people. And Ezra is noticed going in both directions in a good way to teach those statutes and ordinances in Israel. So what we have here, and we're going to look at the last in a whole series. In chapters 1 through 6, we had a number of ordinances that were given. We had Ezra chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, where Cyrus had given a command and ordinance in writing. These were all in writing. Permission for the Jews to return and build their temple. And then we saw in Ezra chapter 4, there was a report in writing from Rahun and Shimshah to the king against the Jews, a bad report. Not that the Jews were doing anything bad, but that these folks, they didn't like what the Jews were doing, so they decided to try to stop the actions of rebuilding the temple. That's what it involved back then. In chapter 4, verse 17, we saw a order, not very detailed, just one verse, from the king, from the emperor. I take that to be Cambyses, the son of Cyrus, to order the construction of the temple to be halted. And so that was an order to halt the construction. Next, we saw in chapter 5, verses 7 through 17, a different author. This is Tateni. And he reported to the king that the Jews had resumed construction of the temple without permission. And so it's like, hey, they're rebelling. It was a bad report. And then we saw by this time it was Darius, and he is mentioned by name in Ezra chapter 6, verses 1 through 12, where they had done research. They had found the original permission from Cyrus, and Darius says it's okay. They can continue it. They can resume the work, even though they'd already started. This is like getting a permit after you've already begun. In construction terms, that's not a good idea, but if God says to do it, then you do what God says. And then finally, we're looking at here Artaxerxes. is giving permission to Ezra, giving him authority to lead a group back to Judah, and will again supply the funds for that. Now, this letter of Artaxerxes, then, in chapter 7, verses 12 through 26, and we're not going to read the whole thing, but it gives permission for Ezra and his companions to travel. It gives them tax-free silver, gold, and access to the temple utensils, which apparently had not been taken back. Some had been left behind there in Mesopotamia, but they're collecting whatever remained, and they're now taking it back. And it's also supplies for the journey. There is authority for them to appoint magistrates and judges over the Jews. Now, they're not going to appoint magistrates over anybody else, but over the Jews, they are picking up. Zerubbabel's not doing this anymore. Zerubbabel, I'm assuming, is long dead. He's not going to be mentioned. But now they have come, and Ezra himself has been given authority, and he's going to be exercising that authority as a priest, not as a king. He's not a king. I'm not even sure we can call him necessarily governor, but as a teacher and a priest, and he will be allowed to make decisions on behalf of the emperor Artaxerxes. Chapter 7, verse 27. Now notice, blessed be the Lord, the God of our fathers. Did you catch that? It's not, there's a personal pronoun here, plural, so far, who has put such a thing in as this in the king's heart, to adorn the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, and has extended loving kindness to me before the king and his counselors, and before all the king's mighty princes. Thus I was strengthened according to the hand of the Lord my God upon me. And I gathered leading men from Israel to go up with me. This has suddenly turned into Ezra's story. We started off reading about Ezra in the third person singular, and we're going to go back to doing that eventually. But right here, attached to the king's command, is Ezra's personal notation, where Ezra is speaking. It's almost like reading excerpts from his diary. If I can be so bold, a prayer diary where he's going to be praying, but he's also going to be talking about his reaction and his thinking along this. So chapter 8 now, beginning verses 1 through 14, we have a list of those who came with Ezra. Verses 15 through 20, there's a call for the Levites to join. After all, they're going to be needed in the work of the temple. Verses 21 to 23, there's fasting and prayer for the journey as they're getting ready. Verses 24 through 30, there's offerings entrusted to priests and to Levites for the journey. And finally, verses 31 through 36, they get there, they arrive on location in Jerusalem, and they faithfully give delivery of the funds that they've been given, as well as the edicts with which they have been entrusted. They are doing this on behalf of the emperor of Persia, the king of Persia, and they were providing both the funds, there's an accounting of those, and edicts that have been given that give Ezra authority to appoint magistrates and to give orders. Chapter 8, verse 32, thus we came to Jerusalem and remained there 3 days. On the fourth day, the silver and the gold and the utensils were weighed out in the house of our God into the hand of Meremoth, the son of Uriah the priest, and with him was Eleazar the son of Phinehas, and with them were the Levites, Jozabad the son of Yeshua, and Noadiah the son of Benui. And so you have these folk, they come forward. Notice everything was numbered and weighed, and all the weight was recorded at that time. Remember, you did not have coins. Not quite sure if it had quite been invented just yet. It was about to be, but that's not mentioned here. Coins were about to be introduced, where you have like a piece of silver or gold, and it has stamped on it the value of that. But here it's all weighed. It's weighed and recorded, and it's all accounted for in an appropriate way. Verse 35, the exiles who had come from the captivity offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 lambs, 12 male goats for a sin offering, all as a burnt offering to the Lord. Then they delivered the king's edicts to the king's satraps and to the governors. So notice, some of these orders are going out to the local satraps and governors who aren't necessarily Jewish themselves, but they're over the Jews, just so everybody's on the same page. Yes, everything is okay. Everything here is above board. And to the governors in the provinces beyond the river, and they supported the people and the house of God. So this time, there's not going to be any opposite. We're not going to read of any opposition from the local Persian governors. That's not going to happen because they've got the letters of authority from the king. Now, some thoughts on accountability, because we see them being very accountable with the funds with which they have been entrusted. A system of checks and balances was in effect, where money was given to them at the start of the journey and an accounting of it, and then it was delivered to the right people at the end of the journey. And there was no question about anybody having, pinched some of the funds, done anything inappropriate with some of the funds. Let me just say, by way of application, churches need accountability. Churches collect quite a bit of money in tithes and offerings and things like that, and that's good, but there needs to be some accountability so that everything is decent and above board, and nobody can be accused of stealing or misappropriating funds. Some checks and balances for that in finances, in our leaders, and individually as well. And so, let me just say, I've had the opportunity to work with churches that did this right. I'm not saying that other churches necessarily did this wrong. I just wasn't, and I wasn't in a position to be able to see either way. I'm assuming they did, hopefully. But I've seen where this was done right in the church of which I currently belong, and it's just been neat where those people who have financial acumen and are able to govern and check and make sure everything's appropriate. And I've been able to see that up close, and I don't like to get my hands on the money. I stand back, but to peek over the shoulder and see how they were doing it, that was good, and that was appropriate, and that was nicely done. We are all, of course, accountable to God, but I think that needs to be reflected in our churches, just in a very practical way. Now, Ezra chapters 7 through 8, then, that's what we've been looking at. We started off with a statement of Ezra's return to Jerusalem with the Jews. That was sort of a summary. We saw it very briefly, and then the details were given, where the king's blessing was on the trip, and there were gifts of gold and silver for the temple. Ezra gathered the leading men to prepare to return to prepare for that trip. A list of those that returned were given in chapter 8, verses 1 through 14. That was a pivotal point. Then we saw Ezra gathering the key people at the river to return. Next, we saw the Jews fast and praying for God's blessing on the trip. And care was given, which we've just been talking about, of the king's gift, the gifts of gold and silver for the temple. And finally, we have them getting there, them arriving with the Jews, and sacrifices are made, and everything's happy. That's chapter 7 and 8. Chapter 9 now, they're back in Jerusalem with Ezra and all those who will come with him. Now, when these things had been completed, the princes approached me, we're still first person singular, saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands according to their abominations. And now we have a listing of the peoples of the lands. There are the Canaanites, the Hittites. The Hittites were sort of all over the place, although there had been much earlier a Hittite empire way up north, but that's long since dissipated. But there are still Hittites around. The Perizzites, the Jebusites, remember those are the folks that lived in and around Jerusalem. The Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. These are all folks that were in the land, and each one had their own religious system. And the problem with not separating from the people is that with the people come their practices and their pagan gods, and there has been a bit of intermarriage between these various peoples. Now, with each other, that's fine, but with the Jewish people, with the people of Israel. Verse 2, for they have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race has intermingled with the peoples of the lands. And that wasn't supposed to be. The holy race was, the word holy means to be set apart. Let me just say, the holy race, the set-apart race, was to be a set-apart race. It was to be a distinct and set-apart race. Indeed, the hands of the princes and the rulers had been foremost in this unfaithfulness. So they had been the Jewish people had been called, be separate, don't be connected to those pagans, especially with their. Now, if somebody converted to Judaism, that's a little bit different. But aside from that, they weren't supposed to be commingling, and that was a dangerous thing because they would no longer be set apart. They would no longer be holy, and pretty soon they wouldn't be worshiping holy either. That's what had gotten them taken into captivity in the first place. And here they are going right back to what had started the problem and undergoing that same thing that had led to the Babylonian captivity. Are we really going to do that again? Verse 3, when I heard about this matter, this is Ezra speaking, I tore my garment and my robe and pulled some of the hair from my head and my beard and sat down appalled. Now, why are you making such a note of his garment, his robe, his head, his beard? Because when we get to Nehemiah, there's going to be the same sort of problem. It's not going to go away permanently. It's going to come back. But in Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 25, just hold this note. We don't have to look there right now. But let me just say, when Nehemiah hears about it, he's going to be not pulling his own hair in his own beard. He's going to do some pulling of them. But Ezra's not doing that. Ezra takes this to heart, and he's just appalled at the situation. In verse 4, then everyone who trembled at the words of the God of Israel on account of the unfaithfulness of the exiles gathered to me, and I sat appalled until the evening offering. So he's at the temple, and he's just like, what do we do about this? And he is just struck with grief and with consternation. Now he goes into the temple now because he is a priest. He can do this. Chapter 9, verses 5 through 15, and he goes in to pray. And in his prayer, he makes recognition of past iniquities. That's what had taken them into the Babylonian captivity in the first place. He recognizes the kindness of God's grace, about how God has let them come back, not just with Zerubbabel, but now with the people that he has brought back. And he makes a confession of the present sin, not that he is engaged in it, but he is confessing on behalf of the people. Remember, the job of a priest is to represent the people to God. And so he's doing this by his prayer. He is representing the people of God, even in their sinfulness. He is representing them to God. And so, chapter 9, we see the problem intermerge with the people of the land. And Ezra is speaking in the first person as he goes in to pray to the Lord. And he gives this prayer of repentance. While he is in there, now he's going to come out in just a second, but in chapter 10, we're going to see they have gathered and they're going to come out with a solution. And the solution will be called Operation Divorce. That all of those people who had taken foreign wives are going to separate themselves from those wives. At least that's the plan. Divorce those wives, put them aside. Ezra is going to be described here in the third person. Instead of I, Ezra, it's going to be talking about Ezra. And we will have this proposal of divorce. So chapter 10, verse 1, while Ezra was praying and making confession, weeping and prostrating himself before the house of God, a very large assembly, men, women, and children, gathered to him from Israel, for the people wept bitterly. They're weeping with him, but they're also gathering. And so he's praying, he's making confession. Verse 2, Shechaniah, the son of Jehiel, one of the sons of Elam. That's not an Elam. Elam is a person rather than the place. He's another probably priest. He's actually been mentioned earlier in the story. Just by name, one of the people that's come back with Ezra. He said to Ezra, we have been unfaithful to our God and have married foreign women from the peoples of the land. Yet now there is hope for Israel in spite of this. There's still a way of escape. My wife, Paula, likes to say that while you still draw breath, there is hope. There's always hope for repentance. Once you're no longer in the land of living, you've already passed that point. But while you draw breath, There's still hope. You can turn back to the Lord. Doesn't mean that all the bad things are going to necessarily go away, but you can still find forgiveness. There is hope. And so notice Shechaniah turns to Ezra with the plan. Here's the plan, verse 3. So now let us make a covenant with our God to put away all the wives and their children. Notice there are children involved here too. According to the counsel of my Lord, and to those who tremble at the commandment of our God, and let it be done according to the law. Remember, the law actually talked about divorce. You would give somebody a certificate of divorce, and that actually cut that off. That wasn't a good thing, but it was a thing. It was there. It was given in the law. Verse 4, arise, for this matter is your responsibility, but we will be with you. Be courageous and act. And it reminds me a little bit of the words that were given to Joshua when they first came into the land. Be strong and courageous. Now this is be courageous and act. And so let's do this. Let's turn the tide. Let's make something happen right now. But notice how it's in form of a covenant. By the covenant is actually to break the marriage covenant into which they had improperly entered. Verse 5, then Ezra arose and made the leading priests, the Levites, and all Israel take oath. So notice there's an oath here. That's sort of part of the covenant. They swore an oath. That's what you do when you're making a covenant, that they would do according to this proposal. So they took the oath. They swear, they make a covenant to break the marital covenant. You say that's rather odd. This was an extreme circumstance because they are in danger of going back, turning the clock back to their former apostasy. Verse 6, then Ezra arose from before the house of God and went into the chamber of Jehohanan, the son of Elishib. Although he went there, he did not eat bread nor drink water, for he was mourning over the unfaithfulness of the exiles. This was a bad situation. No matter how you slice it, this was a bad situation. It was like a cancer that had invaded the body. And so, like you do with a cancer, and let me just say, I actually last year had some cancer in one of my lungs, and they drilled into my side. I don't recommend this. You don't do this for fun. And they cut out a piece of my lung. You want your lungs. You need your lungs. But the cancer was worse. And so they took out a piece of that. And I'm glad they did. You say you're glad that they cut part of your lung out? Yes, because of the cancer that would spread and would grow and would end up killing the entire body. And this is what's taking place here. They're going to cut out that cancerous part of their religious life. Verse 7, they made a proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem to all the exiles that they should assemble at Jerusalem, and that whoever would not come within 3 days, according to the counsel of the leaders and the elders, all his possessions should be forfeited, and he himself excluded from the assembly of the exiles. Notice, if you did not participate, if you did not show up, then you're going to be treated as the problem rather than the solution. You're going to be treated as though you are part of the cancerous thing that needs to be cut out. Verse 9, so all the men of Judah and Benjamin assembled at Jerusalem. Now that's within the area. You say, well, why not the other tribes? The other tribes they're still scattered. These are the people that are close by. Judah, and remember we talked about Benjamin having been part of this, part of Judah really almost, but they are distinctive. So all the men of Judah and Benjamin assembled at Jerusalem within the 3 days. It was the 9th month, on the 20th day of the month. Now, when you say the 9th month, remember their month that's not September. That's around November, around the 20th of the month. Think around when we celebrate Thanksgiving. Okay, just to get the general time of the year. And all the people sat in the open square before the house of God, trembling because of this matter. And notice something else happens on the 9th month, the heavy rain. You see, that's the beginning of the rainy season. The rains begin around October they'll begin lightly, and by November that you're in the rainy season. Now it's going to continue to December, January, February. By March it's pretty much ending, and by April it's just about finished. So rainy season is in the winter months. It's sort of chilly because that's November. It's not snowing, just raining, but it's chilly. And notice, and they're chilly. They're outdoors as they're doing this. Then Ezra the priest stood up and said to them, "You have been unfaithful and have married foreign wives, adding to the guilt of Israel." And there was some past guilt, but now you've brought some present guilt. "Now therefore make confession to the Lord God of your fathers and do his will, and separate yourselves from the peoples of the land and from the foreign wives." If you're not married, don't take any more foreign wives. Doesn't mean you can't get married, but marry somebody that's Jewish. Marry somebody that's a part of the covenant, and separate yourselves from the foreign wives. Then all the assembly replied with a loud voice, "That is right. As you have said, so it is our duty to do." But now here's the problem. It's a problem in logistics, but there are many people. It is the rainy season, which it was, and we are not able to stand in the open, nor can the task be done in 1 or 2 days. After all, they're going to be writing a bill of divorcement. They can't all write. so so this is going to take some time for you to go to the local scribe and get this done, for we have transgressed greatly in this matter. It's not just a matter of 1 or 2 divorces. There are quite a number that are going to take place. Let our leaders represent the whole assembly, and let all those in our cities who have married foreign wives come at appointed times, not all at once, but we're going to space it out, together with the elders and judges of each city, until the fierce anger of our God on account of this matter is turned away from us. It's going to take some time, but we are going to do it in a timely way. Verse 15, only Jonathan, the son of Asahel, and Haziah, the son of Tikvah, opposed this, with Meshullam and Sabbathai, the Levites, supporting them. So notice there's a majority report. Most of them go along with the great majority, but there is a minority, 2 people, 2 priests, it sounds like, and then 2 Levites who say, "I'm not so sure this is a good idea." And but we're not going to hear from them again. So it's a minority report, the majority report. One of the questions we ask sometimes, who was right? I think you're supposed to come away with saying, look, divorce is a bad thing, but this was an extreme case. Here it needed to take place. Now, chapters 9 and 10, then, as far as the whole outline, we have the problem that was introduced back in chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, the problem of intermarriage. We saw the people gathering around Ezra. He sits in distress over the problem, verses 3 and 4. Ezra kneels in prayer in the temple. That's chapter 9, verses 5 through 15. And the pivotal point in the story, they come up with a solution. And the solution was Operation Divorce. That was the pivotal point. Next, Ezra arises from prayer in the temple. He'd been in prayer, and now he comes out, and here's the plan. And Ezra fathers the people. He gathers the people. He gathers the people. They sit in distress, and representatives sit over the problem. And now we see the problem in intermarriage resolved. An investigation is made, it's done appropriately in a timely manner, and finally we have a list, and it's a very long list, of all those who had taken foreign wives. Now, some closing thoughts on divorce. First of all, let me say that divorce involves cutting off that which is meant to be whole. That's a bad thing. Amputating, that's a bad thing. No one wants to have their hands or legs, or in my case, a piece of my lung, amputated. That's a bad thing. Unless leaving it there is even worse, and that can be there too. So Jesus himself said, we can quote him, Mark chapter 10, verse 9, "What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate." Those words are true, but there are at times exceptions to the rule. Like I said, you don't go around cutting out people's lungs just for no reason. But you do if the danger is great enough. You don't go amputating arms and legs just for no reason. But if the danger is great enough, if the infection is serious enough, then that might be called for. The book of Malachi is going to be written a few generations after this. How far after this, I'm not sure. It's not written in Ezra's day, but a few generations later, where God says, I hate divorce, says the Lord, the God of Israel. And let him who covers his garment with wrong, says the Lord of hosts, so take heed to your spirit that you do not deal treacherously. Divorce is a bad thing. Let me just say, divorce is always a bad thing. Sometimes necessary. Cutting out part of your lung is always a bad thing. Cutting off an arm or a leg is always a bad thing. There are occasions where it may be necessary, but it's necessary because an even worse thing has taken place. When God speaks through Malachi, I think what's happened here, and I'm reading into the book of Malachi. I know we're not studying that right now, but in a later generation, the people of Israel might have been thinking, well, gee, grandpa and grandma, they got divorced, so it must be okay for me. Let me just say, no, it's not. If you have that kind of maybe super serious um, situation where a spiritual gangrene is setting in, okay, I can see that point. But divorce is always bad. Sometimes because there's a worse thing, it might be necessary, but God hates divorce. So just take those words to heart. Divorce is not good. Next, I want you to see, we already said it's. Now, in Ezra's case, this amputation was seen as necessary for Israel's spiritual survival. So, yes, it had to be done, but it was not a good thing, and it doesn't involve an amputation. We ought to say it as such. Secondly, there are times when separation or divorce is a painful necessity. As in Ezra's case, it was deemed to be a painful necessity. You don't want to do it, but to not do it would be even worse. That does not necessarily endorse a remarriage to a different partner. So divorce does not necessarily endorse remarriage. It can, depending on the situation, and we're going to look at that, some of those situations, but not necessarily. It does. It is allowed in the New Testament. We have a specification that if it is a divorce because of unfaithfulness on the part of the guilty party toward the innocent one, then that can be a legitimate divorce, which doesn't have to, but which can lead to remarriage. Now, let me just say, because I have seen that kind of divorce, I'm thinking of a friend of mine, a very close friend from way back. We don't see each other these days because we don't live in the same state. But there was some unfaithfulness, and it led to a divorce. And he did not remarry, and she didn't either. And after a time, there was a reconciliation and a reunion. And let me just say, they got married again because they had married somebody else in the interim. And he had remained faithful, and they're still going strong. In fact, their kids these days are adults themselves, and they're doing great. And now that was painful. That was hard. I'm not saying it always works out that way, but I've seen it take place in a really good way. Next, I want to point out that the New Testament addresses the question of an unequal marriage, which is the question that we're looking at here in the book of Ezra. And the New Testament, because the situation of New Testament believers today is just a little bit different from the Jewish people back then who had come out of worshiping idols and who had been taken into the Babylonian captivity over that, our situation is a little bit different. So that when it comes to believers and unbelievers, let me just say, don't marry, if you're a Christian, do not marry a non-Christian. Don't do it. You're told very specifically don't do it in the same way that the Jewish person was told don't marry the pagan. Be holy in the same way that they were called to be holy. Now, that's not, I'm not talking about an ethnic sort of issue. I'm not talking about a racial sort of issue. I am talking about a spiritual sort of issue. If you are a Christian, do not marry a non-Christian. However, it is possible for a a person who was a Christian to find themselves married to a non-Christian because they both started off as non-Christians and they got married, and there's nothing wrong with that. Marriage is good. And yet one of them becomes a Christian and the other one doesn't. And I've seen that take place as well. And in such a case, you're told, first of all, don't enter into that marriage. If you're a Christian, don't marry a non-Christian. Don't automatically seek to end such a marriage if you find yourself in that place. And maybe you found yourself in that place because you became a Christian. And wait a minute, my spouse is not a believer. Does that mean I have to go get a divorce? No, you don't. In fact, you are instructed, try to remain in that marriage. Don't automatically seek to end such a marriage. Or maybe you were disobedient. You weren't supposed to marry a non-Christian, but you did anyway. I want to do things my way. Don't go and try to get a divorce because of that. You entered into that. You stay married if you are able to. Don't automatically seek to end such a marriage. If it does end through no fault of your own, in other words, that person decides, I don't want to be married anymore. I want a divorce. Maybe it's an unfaithfulness thing. Maybe they just didn't want to be married anymore. Don't initiate that, but if they do, then you are, according to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, free. And if you are free, then I would suggest you are free in such a case even to remarry. Not that you have to, not that it's even the best thing. It might be good to stay single, but you're free to remarry. So if you are single, let me just say, if you're single, never been married, you have an option. You can stay single. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you do stay single, make sure you also live a single life. That you live a chaste life. If you have a problem with that, then there's a solution. Go get married. Because if you're single, you have an option to get married or to stay single. It's okay. You can change, but only to a believer. Only to a Christian. If you're a Christian, don't go marrying an unbeliever. Just don't do that. If you are married, then you are called to stay married, or if that is not possible, and the other person initiates the divorce, then you're free. But if you can't stay married, and there are times where somebody, again, given all sorts of reasons, they just can't stay married to that other person, whether it was a Christian or a non-Christian. Yeah, marriage is hard. And if you just feel like you can't take it, you need to get divorced, stay single. Divorce, it's not a good thing. Remember, that's like an amputation. But if you need to be if you need something amputated, then do that. But stay single. If the spouse is a Christian, if the other party said, I don't want to be married, and they divorce you, and the other party is a non-Christian, then as I see it, you've been set free. Even then, I wouldn't go get married in a hurry. Do not do that. Look before you leap. You have an option, but wait and see, because you already had one bad marriage. So let's not compound that with another. So take care, be careful, be very careful. In all things, let me just say, I think that God is able to come and there's still hope. You say, well, gee, I did these bad things. I married a non-Christian, or I got divorced, and so, there's still hope. There's hope of forgiveness, but that's when I say that, I'm not saying so go out and sin and just get forgiven. No, don't do that, because you've been warned. Don't do that. But if you have sinned, if you've done wrong, if you've chosen badly, there's still hope. There's still grace, and God is the forgiving God, and you can still turn to Him. And He will tell you what Jesus told. Remember the story of the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8? He will tell you, I forgive you, but go and sin no more. Don't keep doing that. Stop it. But you can find forgiveness.